My name is Lily, and I have 2 husbands. Here is my beautiful story. People often say love is complicated, as if it's an immutable truth. For me, love was never complicated. It was simple, honest, and uncontainable. What complicated everything was the world around me. It began with a dream, not a metaphorical one, but a real dream I had one humid July night. I was sitting in a sunlit field, hand in hand with 2 men, and we were laughing. The warmth of their touches, the way they looked at me, it felt so real that when I woke, my heart ached with longing. But longing for what? I was already in a committed relationship with Daniel, my boyfriend of 6 years. A good man, a kind man, someone who wanted to marry me and spend his life with me. But the dream planted a seed in my mind I couldn't ignore. What if my heart had room for more than one person? And what if there was a way to live a life where everyone involved agreed? I tried to dismiss the idea, but it followed me like a shadow. Days turned to weeks, and I found myself Googling articles about polyamory late at night, learning about the lives of people who loved more than one partner. Stumbled upon stories of triads, quads, and unconventional arrangements, each one feeling less like a curiosity and more like a mirror. Slowly, I began to realize that my dream wasn't just a fantasy. It was a calling. When I finally brought it up to Daniel, I thought I might faint. "You want what?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief but not anger. I want us to consider opening our relationship, to bring another person into our lives." "Another man," I said, forcing the words out like they might shatter. His brow furrowed, and he rubbed his temples. "You want 2 husbands." "Yes, but only if you're open to it." "I wouldn't, Lily. This isn't something people just do," he interrupted, though his tone was gentle. "It's not how things work." "What would people say?" "I don't care what people say," I replied, surprised by my own firmness. "I care about us. And I think this could work if we're honest with each other. I love you, Daniel." "That hasn't changed." For a long moment, he didn't speak. The silence stretched between us like a canyon, and I felt myself teetering on the edge. Finally, he looked at me, his blue eyes steady. "I don't know if I can do this, Lily, but I love you, and I'll try to understand." That was the beginning. A shaky, uncertain beginning, but a beginning nonetheless. Over the next few months, Daniel and I had long, often painful conversations about what this would mean for us. He asked questions I didn't always have answers to. What if he felt jealous? What if the other man didn't respect our relationship? What if this destroyed us? But as we talked, something surprising happened. Daniel began to see the idea not as a threat, but as an evolution. "If we're doing this," he said one night, "it has to be someone who fits into our lives. Someone who respects us both." Finding that someone was easier said than done. I joined online forums and attended local meetups for people interested in ethical non-monogamy. But it quickly became clear that my situation was unusual. Most men I met were either interested in casual arrangements or wanted to be the sole partner in a woman's life. The idea of sharing, of truly sharing, seemed foreign to them. "You want 2 husbands?" one man asked, his tone dripping with incredulity. "Good luck with that." I began to wonder if I was chasing an impossible dream. But just when I was about to give up, I met James. James was a high school English teacher, with a quick wit and an easy smile. We met at a discussion group about unconventional relationships, and from the moment he spoke, I was captivated. He talked about love as something fluid and expansive, not a finite resource to be hoarded. When I told him about my vision for a polyandrous marriage, he didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled. "That's bold," he said, "and kind of beautiful." As we got to know each other, I realized James was exactly the kind of person I'd been searching for: open-minded, thoughtful, and deeply respectful. He didn't just want to be with me, he wanted to be part of a family, to build something meaningful with Daniel and me. But convincing Daniel to let James into our lives was another hurdle. At first, Daniel was wary. He saw James as a potential threat, someone who might upend the life we'd built together. But James wasn't just patient, he was persistent. He invited Daniel to coffee, where they talked about everything from sports to philosophy. Slowly, their initial tension gave way to mutual respect. One night, as we all sat together in our living room, Daniel surprised me by saying, "You know, James, you're not as bad as I thought." James laughed. "High praise coming from you." And just like that, a tentative friendship began to form. But the road ahead was anything but smooth. Friends and family reacted with a mix of confusion, judgment, and outright hostility when they learned about my decision. My mother was especially vocal. "Two husbands. Lily, what's wrong with you? That's not normal." "It's normal for me," I replied, though her words stung. Work colleagues whispered behind my back, and old friends started pulling away. It hurt, but I reminded myself that their opinions didn't define my happiness. What mattered was the bond I was building with Daniel and James, a bond based on trust, love, and mutual respect. As the months turned into years, our unconventional marriage faced its share of challenges. There were arguments, moments of jealousy, and times when I questioned whether I'd made the right choice. But there were also moments of pure joy, family dinners filled with laughter, quiet nights when we sat together watching the stars, and the indescribable comfort of knowing I was loved, completely and unconditionally, by two incredible men. Our love wasn't conventional, but it was ours, and that, I realized, was all that mattered. Over time, Daniel, James, and I found ourselves settling into a rhythm, though it wasn't always easy. Living with two partners came with complexities I hadn't fully anticipated. For one, both men had wildly different personalities. Daniel was structured and deliberate, someone who thrived on routine and predictability. James, on the other hand, was spontaneous and adventurous, the kind of person who would suggest a midnight road trip just because the stars looked particularly bright. These differences sometimes led to friction. "You know, not everything has to be planned a month in advance," James quipped one evening when Daniel suggested mapping out our summer vacation. "And not everything can be left to the last minute," Daniel shot back. "Some of us have jobs that require notice." I watched the two of them from the kitchen, unsure whether to intervene or let them sort it out themselves. In the early days of our relationship, I often felt like a mediator, trying to bridge their contrasting temperaments. But as time went on, I realized that their differences were also what made our dynamic work. Daniel grounded James, and James pushed Daniel out of his comfort zone. They complemented each other in ways I never could have predicted. Still, there were moments when I doubted myself. Was I being selfish? Was it fair to ask two men to share my love? These questions haunted me, especially on nights when one of them seemed quieter than usual or when tension simmered just below the surface. I tried to be as open as possible, encouraging both Daniel and James to share their feelings, even when the truth was hard to hear. "I feel like I'm competing with him sometimes," Daniel admitted one night as we lay in bed. "You're not competing," I said softly, stroking his hair. "You're both equally important to me. It's just different. I've always been the only one, and now I have to share you." "I know it's hard," I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. "But I promise, my love for you hasn't changed. If anything, it's grown." Loving James doesn't take away from what we have, it adds to it. He nodded, though I could tell he wasn't entirely convinced. Love might not be a finite resource, but time and attention were, and balancing the needs of two partners sometimes felt like walking a tightrope. But I was determined to make it work. "You're ruining your life," his father said over the phone. "This isn't love. It's a disgrace." James tried to brush it off, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. "It doesn't matter," he said one night as we sat on the porch. "I don't need their approval." "But it does matter," I said, taking his hand. "You deserve to be loved for who you are." He smiled faintly, but the shadow of his family's judgment lingered. As our relationship deepened, we began to confront practical questions about our future. Where would we live? How would we handle finances? What would happen if one of us wanted children? These weren't questions with easy answers, and each conversation felt like uncharted territory. We should draw up some kind of agreement, Daniel suggested one evening, something that outlines responsibilities, finances, and decision-making. Like a contract, James asked, raising an eyebrow. Exactly. It's not romantic, but it's practical. James hesitated, but eventually, he agreed. Together, we worked out an arrangement that accounted for everything from splitting household expenses to deciding how we'd navigate major life decisions. It wasn't the most romantic process, but it gave us a sense of security, a framework to guide us as we built our unconventional family. Our friends, for the most part, were supportive, though some were cautiously curious. So how does this work? My best friend, Mia, asked over coffee one day. Do you, sleep with them both at the same time? I laughed, though I could feel my cheeks flushing. No, it's not like that. We each have our own moments together. It's not about the physical stuff as much as it's about the emotional connection. She nodded, though I could tell she still didn't entirely understand. Well, as long as you're happy, that's all that matters. But not everyone was so accepting. My boss at work, a stern woman in her late 50s, pulled me aside after hearing whispers about my personal life. I'm not here to judge, she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. But you might want to keep certain aspects of your lifestyle private. It's not exactly professional. I nodded, biting back the urge to defend myself. I knew she meant well, or thought she did, but her words stung. Why did love have to conform to a narrow definition to be considered valid? Despite the challenges, our love continued to grow. Birthdays, holidays, and quiet Sunday mornings became shared rituals. Moments that wove the three of us together like threads in a tapestry. We learned to navigate jealousy, misunderstandings, and the occasional flare-ups of insecurity, always coming back to the foundation we'd built: honesty, communication, and an unshakable commitment to each other. Then, one winter evening, James surprised us with a question that would change everything. What if we made this official? He asked as we sat around the dining table. Official how? Daniel asked, furrowing his brow. Like a ceremony, a commitment ceremony. It wouldn't be legally binding, but it would mean something to us. I looked at him, my heart swelling. You mean, like a wedding? Exactly, James said, his eyes shining. I want to stand up in front of the people who matter and say that I choose you. Both of you. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, and I held my breath, unsure of how he'd react. Finally, he nodded. Yeah, he said softly. Let's do it. Planning our ceremony was an adventure in itself. We wanted something intimate and meaningful, a celebration of our love that reflected the unique bond we shared. We chose a quiet meadow just outside the city, surrounded by wildflowers and the sound of rustling leaves. Only our closest friends and family were invited, and though not everyone approved, those who came did so with open hearts. On the day of the ceremony, I stood between Daniel and James, my heart overflowing with love. As we exchanged vows, promising to support and cherish each other through all of life's challenges, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Our journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every struggle, every tear, every moment of doubt. In that meadow, under a sky streaked with gold and lavender, I looked at my two husbands and knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that we had created something beautiful.